What's up, you beautiful chuds, and welcome to the Let's Talk Horror channel. It's review time because I took myself and my partner down to my local cinema to go and watch a movie that, of course, I am super excited to watch. Whenever these movies come out that's connected to this franchise, it always feels like an occasion, especially for me, which I'm going to go into. But we went down and watched Evil Dead Burn, the newest entry into the ever-growing, the ever-evolving franchise that is, of course, The Evil Dead. In this one, after the loss of her husband, a woman seeks solace with her in-laws as one by one they transform into deadites. She comes to discover that the vows she took in life survive even in death. Now, there's a couple things that I want to go through before I actually get into, the meat and bones, so to say, of what this review is. For one, you've already clicked on this review, and if you have, thank you. Of course, it means the world to me. But you already know that this isn't a 60-second, 1 minute, 2 minute review of me going, it's good, it's bad, whatever. My reviews aren't that, and they're not that. So if you want 60-second reviews, look at your reels somewhere else. But this isn't going to be one of those reviews, and they never are, because I just can't do that. And also, I don't want to do that. So when I do this review, I just want to tell you, and of course be as honest as I can, because for me to be as honest as I possibly can, and to be as constructive as I possibly can about giving you how I feel about this movie or any movie that I'm reviewing, I have to talk about things that happen in the movie, which means that there will be spoilers, but it's not something where I just want to try and ruin everything for everyone. But I have to talk about the things that happen for me to get across how I feel about the movie itself in its entirety. As of right now, bearing in mind, I literally saw it like an hour ago and then came back and I've done this review. So this is a very fresh reaction review to how I feel about the movie. But but basically, if you haven't seen the movie yet, make sure you see the movie before you watch this review, because you're going to find out probably things that you really don't want to. Or also, you don't want any of your judgment or going into it tainted a little bit. I don't want people thinking what I say, and I say this, of course, to you all the time. When I do my reviews, it's purely my opinion. It is not and shouldn't be your opinion of it. You might think that I'm talking absolute shit about it, and that's fine because you're meant to. You might agree with me, you might not. That's live. That's horror. Horror is great because it's so subjective and it's meant to be. The other thing, and the reason I'm setting up this review like this, is because, before I'm getting like even to talking about the movie, is that so the Evil Dead franchise is my favorite franchise in horror. And that's why I am always very excited about when these movies come out, but I'm also, and I do have that optimism about it, especially with everything that's come before it. But I'm also a little bit worried about it because the problem with Evil Dead for me is that every single movie that they have done in this franchise so far has not just been a good movie, they have been great movies. And of course, there are people out there that are going to completely disagree with me. And as I said, that's fine. You're allowed to, so don't worry. But I truly love the Evil Dead franchise. It is incredibly inspiring to me, and it is, as I said, for me, it's all about the quality and not necessarily the quantity. I love the Evil Dead franchise. So what I'm going to talk about now is basically, and the reason I'm setting it up like this is to show you the gravitas of sort of how important these movies are to me and how important it is for these movies, the Evil Dead movies, to be great and not just good. And that's what we're going to get into. So the way that I do my reviews as well, to give you the most constructive review, I go through it, sort of individually, where I talk about my pros, which is everything that I loved about the movie. I go through my cons, which are the things that I don't love about the movie. And then I give you my overall thoughts on everything that I feel about this movie. So let's do it. Let's get into my pros. So when it comes to my pros, luckily, Evil Dead Burn does something that every Evil Dead movie should do, and that is sort of when you take a step back and you look at what makes Evil Dead, and you look at it almost like a tick box exercise sort of thing. Evil Dead Burn does a lot of that. It ticks the right boxes, which is already a win for the movie. If you go into this movie and you come out of it and you're like, it didn't do anything to have any form of like relationship with anything that came before it with Evil Dead, then it just feels like it's a movie with the Evil Dead name put on it, the IP. You know, we see that so much in horror where you've got these, you know, the IPs that get put with these movies that sort of like have no relevance to it whatsoever. This movie, within reason, and there are aspects of it where it don't, but I'll talk about that as well. If we're looking at the tick boxes, it is going to tick more of the boxes of it being an Evil Dead movie than it doesn't, which is an absolute plus for it. One of the boxes, of course, it has to tick is the fact that Evil Dead for me is the most visually creative storytelling on a visual level, cinematic movie level that there is in horror. And in fact, a lot of cinema, if we're talking about franchises, you get the opportunity when you're making an Evil Dead movie to be so visually creative where the shackles are off. You know, you are free from the standardization of what a cinematic on a cinematic level, so to speak. So you get the opportunity to be as creative as you want to be and can be. The good thing is that Evil Dead Burn does do that. This movie is visually fantastic. There are some absolutely stunning shots in this. Now, some of them, of course, do feel like they don't necessarily need to be there, but also it is something that does make it a little bit more fun visually when we are getting the moments where things are happening, or we either are getting in moments where things aren't necessarily happening. It's still about creating that Evil Dead visual aesthetic style. And I'll talk a little bit about my cons, what the things that I might not necessarily like about that. But in a whole, when you're watching this movie, you sort of really do understand that it's made by a filmmaker that is going, right, I am making an Evil Dead movie. I also still want to make it my own movie, but I do really need to understand the visual style of what Evil Dead is and bring that in. Because if you don't, then you don't get that tick under does it look and feel and be as creative or uniquely creative as what an Evil Dead movie has been in the past. If you don't do that, you've sort of fucked yourself. So does this movie do that? Yes, absolutely. It is visually fantastic. Also, part of the visuals as well is the set pieces. I do really love the set pieces in this because they feel big. And also, I love the fact that they aren't things like it's not like when you watch a movie and it's got a car chase for like 30 seconds or a minute. These are prolonged set pieces that not only visually look really good, but they work really well. There's a lot of depth to the set pieces as well. Like, you know, there's things happening in the background as well as the forefront. We might be following somebody that's not even part of everything that's sort of like really kicking off at the moment, but we see everything happening. It's very well directed when it comes to, as I said, the visual side of that and the storytelling side of that through the visual medium of cinema. But it does a very good job at the set pieces that when they happen, you know, you can't take your eyes off them. And even though for a lot of people out there, there are going to be moments where people really don't want to be watching the things that are happening, but at the same time, it doesn't really make it an Evil Dead movie if you don't do that. There is some gnarly shit that happens in this movie, which, as I said, I'll get into. Of course, once again, being an Evil Dead movie, one of the tick boxes you have to do is sound design, whether that's the score itself, whether that's the sound design of how the impact of the punches or the horrible things that happen in this movie, the chewing on glass, the drinking wax, anything like that. You know, once again, like being a director of an Evil Dead movie means that you get the opportunity to really force creativity, and that's why I love it so much. And once again, that's a success for this movie. The score itself works very well with the movie. I like the fact that the score, once again, and that's how you know you've done it right, where the score is hitting the same beats as to what is happening in the movie. And that's, you know, such a great thing that I feel that a lot of movies have sort of lost now. So it's a very good score, but also, as I said, the sound design itself of the really messed up moments, the messed up things that happen in it, that it helps deliver the impact of those moments that happen. So sound design is also absolutely fantastic about it. And I also suppose that a real positive to the movie that can also be seen as a negative. So once again, this movie sort of like, for me, in a lot of aspects walks a bit of a fine line. But it's the fact that this movie does try to venture into more depth of a grounded look at life, love, death, and of course grief. There are, all the characters in this movie have essentially lost loved ones. Also, other characters within the movie are dealing with the loved ones that they have in the movie, and who they are, or how things, or the diseases and the conditions that they may have. This is a movie that is really trying to you know look at that in a or trying to humanize the movie, because they're trying to give that, when the things happen, it tries to give a higher impact to these characters when things are happening. But I'm going to talk about my cons, or in my cons, about how it may or may not work. But I do like the fact that he, obviously, as a director, has decided that he's trying to do something a little bit different and make something his own. Because at the end of the day, when you make an Evil Dead movie, you're really not trying to do a replication. You're still trying to make your own Evil Dead movie, but you still have to tread that fine line so you don't piss every Evil Dead fan off. Because then, if you're not making an Evil Dead movie, like I've already said, and you're just putting a name to it, well, then that doesn't tick, like I said, any of the boxes. But if you are ticking the boxes, then you're still doing the right thing. But you still, as a filmmaker, of course, you want to make your own Evil Dead movie. You want to put your own stamp on it. And I think that this movie absolutely, definitely does that. But I also think that there are the stamp that he's making. I don't necessarily think that all of it works, which once again I will get into. And then the other pro that I've got is, of course, with it being an Evil Dead movie, this movie is brutal. This movie is bloody. This movie is gory. This movie has great practical effects. There is some pretty bad CGI in it when we head towards the end, or a character that we have towards the end, and what sort of happens to them. Once again, I don't try and flat out try and ruin the movie for people. That's not what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to keep a little bit sort of, if you do watch this for some reason before you're watching the movie, I don't want to try and spoil everything for you. But there's questionable CGI. But when we get the practical effects, it looks great. It's gnarly. It does exactly what an Evil Dead movie should do. And this movie is, and it is, of course, something that has, when you get these movies, and of course, like, one of the big selling points that they're putting on all the promo is how that this is the most violent, most sadistic, most relentless sort of Evil Dead movie in regards to the brutality, the blood, guts, and gore. I would, for once, actually agree with that in regards to this movie is very, very sadistic. This is a very, this is a movie where horrible, horrible things happen. And we do have that in the Evil Dead movies in the past. But I would say that this one really is a movie that really goes to the depths of doing some unspeakable things, or horrible, horrible things that I don't necessarily agree with some aspects of it, which once again I will get to. But that they actually do have right in regards to, for once, the marketing. Do listen to it. They're telling you that this is unrelenting. They're telling you this is sadistic, bloody, violent, and the most violent, and of the franchise. I would actually say, yeah, it probably is, which is also mental, because when you start thinking about the franchise as a whole and what we have seen in the franchise so far, that goes to show how far this movie goes, if it's going to be the one that is, as sadistic and as dark and as horrible and gruesome as it is. That's pretty gnarly, right? So there we go. That's pros. I'm sure over time there might be some more, but they're the big ones that sort of stand out to me at the moment. Once again, it sort of comes down to the tick boxes. And is it ticking the right boxes for an Evil Dead movie? Yeah, it really is. But at the same time, is there some boxes that are sort of left unticked, or is there questions that I sort of raise about certain aspects of it? Yeah, there is. So let's get into my cons. So when it comes to cons, the first one I want to talk about is something that, of course, has always been really integral to the Evil Dead franchise, and it is something that really helps it stand out. Sadly, this movie, for me personally, does something that a lot of modern day movies and horror movies predominantly do. So throughout the history of the Evil Dead, I mean, I don't even really need to talk about the first three, because essentially all you have to say is Bruce Campbell as Ash. We love this guy, we love this character. You don't really need to say anything more than that. But then, of course, when we get to Evil Dead 2013, there is something still about these characters where they do feel a little bit more standardized, because we are put into a horror movie that, of course, is very different to the previous three Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell sort of Evil Dead movies. It feels very different. Evil Dead 2013 is a different animal in regards to tone and concept and so, all that sort of stuff. You know, if you've seen it, you know what I mean. I don't need to go on about it. But there is still something enjoyable about these characters. You're still happy. You still want to be on this journey with these characters to see where they go. And of course, Mia or Maya, wherever you are in the world, we say it differently. But Mia, for example, you know, ends up, you know, she has the struggles throughout the movie. She has, it's performed brilliantly, as all the characters are in it. And then, of course, she becomes the badass that we expect from an Evil Dead movie at the end. Evil Dead Rise, we essentially get the same sort of thing. We get characters set up that we're happy to be on the journey with. We get Mama Deadite, who, of course, is just, you know, absolutely incredible in the movie, and it just sells the movie so well. And then, of course, we do end up getting another sort of final girl in the movie who is, once again, ends up being a badass. In this one, the sad thing for me is that we do sort of get that, but the whole journey that we're on with it, as much as it's dealing with, like I said, about the grief, about loss, about love, I I found myself really honestly not really on board with caring, and that's sad, because when you have an Evil Dead movie and you know these horrible things are going to happen to people, you want to hope, you want to have that hope that something happens for them that gets them almost out of this situation. Or, as we know, predominantly when it comes to the Evil Dead movies, you get one, or if you're lucky, two people that sort of survive at the end. And with this one, it's sort of like, who, for me personally, it's like whoever it's going to be, and of course we sort of predominantly know who that's going to be. I just didn't really care so much, and that sort of sucked. And I felt like that early at the start of the movie, and I felt like that as we got to the end of it as well. And as this character becomes, you know, more of a badass, as they do before, you know, be in front of you, as they do in the before movies of the franchise, it still never had that. It never delivered that impact. And I don't, and a lot of that is to do with the fact that, quite honestly, the characters just didn't. I didn't care too much about the characters, even though they tried creating characters that you're really supposed to care about because of everything that they're going through. And I just feel like that this is a lot of case for me personally in modern day horror movies, where we keep on having these characters where there doesn't feel like there's too much character to them, even if they're trying. And that was a real sort of a negative thing for me, which really sucked. You know, you want to have these characters that you're happy to be on this journey with, because then it like really raises the stakes for the events that happen in the movie, and you sort of feel something more about these characters. And it that doesn't really work. And then also, when it comes to characters, you know, there are certain things that they're doing with characters that I didn't necessarily like, which, you know, which I'll talk about as well, and so on like that. But I'll get to that later as well. But one of the other things that sort of goes with the character side of it is that I don't necessarily also think that the performances are as good as what we have previously seen or can see in movies like this. I am not saying they're bad at all, and I don't think that they're bad. But once again, it just felt like none of the characters felt like they ever were delivering the impact of what was really happening. And that was a little bit sad, because I feel like we've always had that with Evil Dead, and I feel like this movie had less of that, or some points none of that, and that really sucks. What I will say is that when we get the you know, the performances of people turning into deadites, the deadites are very good in this, in regards to, once again, capturing how our deadite sort of feels within Evil Dead. There are a couple obviously that stand out, like the son's girlfriend. She's very good. Of course, we saw her in the trailer drinking the wax. She's very good. And then also the dad, the husband in it. Once again, very dark, very sinister, very evil as a Deadite. The Deadite stuff, all of that sort of stuff works very well. And then, of course, when we get those great set pieces, it just adds to it. It's not just human fighting another human. Well, it is, but it's, in this, it's a human fighting a human that's now a demon, that has a demon in them. And it obviously it adds an extra element to the, to all the set pieces and so on. But yeah, once again, to go with the character side, the characterization of how I just sort of didn't really care as much as I wanted to. The performances didn't help me with that, and that sort of really sucks. And I was really sort of gutted about that because, of course, as I said, I love the characters of Evil Dead, but the performances are also something that helps that work, helps that stand out, and it sort of didn't, and that really sucks. Especially, as I keep saying, as you look at everything that came before in the franchises, it just doesn't really work. One of the other things that sort of I struggled with a little bit in regards to like getting a little bit frustrated by is that, once again, and I have said it, this movie is, when we're talking about the brutality, the violentness of what Evil Dead is, this is, the most downright dirty, gnarly looking, visually, or the actions that they actually take in it, the things that are happening. It is so violent and so brutal, and so on like that. But sometimes there are moments in it where I'm like, is that where you're going first? And what I mean by that is, we do have the concept, the story, but when we're away from the set pieces that are great, when we're away from the brutality of everything, I feel like it just falls very flat. And you don't want that from an Evil Dead movie, because when the things aren't happening, it still never, once again, you go back to previous entries, they never feel flat when we're having all the conversations with the families from Evil Dead Rise, or with Mia and the struggles that she's having, with drug addiction and everything like that. Like, you're still invested in these characters before everything goes horribly wrong. And throughout this movie, of course, you have all this very real life, conversations and things that are happening, once again, around love, life, grief, and death, and everything like that. But the problem is that it just feels a little bit flat when we're not in those set pieces. And that, to me, it feels like it was like, what I'm concerned about was that it felt like the focus was more so on making sure they're delivering that the violent Evil Dead movie, or the most violent and brutal Evil Dead movie. That was the most important thing above everything else. And I don't necessarily think that that's the best way to approach an Evil Dead movie, if that was the approach. And if it wasn't, then that's how I personally feel about when I watch this movie, that the violent nature of what this movie is was the thing that outweighed the rest of the stuff. Because when we were outside of, once again, the great set pieces, the violent nature of the movie, it felt a bit flat, even though we're dealing with real world, grounded characters. It still, once again, felt a little bit flat when we got to those moments. And once again, it just feels a little bit of a shame. Also, as good as the visuals are, this movie does do something that, of course, a lot of movies do in modern day horror. And this is a movie that is completely, essentially desaturated. It is bleached out as much as you can sort of get. There's very limited color palette to this. And as a filmmaker, or somebody wants to make movies and stuff, like, and anybody that's a filmmaker, you really do understand the importance of color and tone to a movie, because it can be something that organically works with everything else in the movie, as long as you get it right, to help deliver the impact of everything you're feeling. And this movie, once again, it's something that makes this movie feel a little bit flat, because there's so little color taken out of it. And then when we get the influx of color in this movie, like, for example, when we get anything to do with fire, the fire stands out, brings color to it. It looks absolutely stunning. And once again, and I've already said, visually, this is a great movie. So it's nothing to knock the camera work, the camera shots, the creativity, the uniqueness of what they do with the movie. But I would have loved to have had a little bit of color to this movie, because once again, adding that, you're brightening up the blood, you're brightening up the reds, adding the saturation into it. Once again, it's all about helping delivering the impact of making you feel how we the movie is trying to make you feel. And then of course there's a lot of moments in it where it's like quite dark, and then you'll like struggle to see some moments in it as well when you don't want to do that. And I think unfortunately it's a problem with a lot of modern day horrors where that's sort of the route they're going, and I don't like it because once again, the color, the tone, the look of a movie is so important to visually being able to tell you, the viewer, how you're supposed to feel, as well as showing you the gnarly stuff that we see in the movie. I just wish there was like a little bit more color in it. But once again, that doesn't mean it's, once again, this is my review, so it's not going to be yours. And as somebody that wants to be a filmmaker, that's how I look at the filmmaking side of it. If you don't want to be a filmmaker, then you're never going to probably give a crap about stuff like that. That's just me. But yeah, the visuals are absolutely great, but I just wish there was a little bit more color and so on like that. And the other start thing that I was a bit of a con for me when it comes to the visual elements, and sort of almost the camera work and the shots and stuff, it felt like there were moments where they had to do the things that do make it very Evil Dead like, but it felt like they did it for the wrong reasons rather than the right reasons. For example, we know in Evil Dead they do a lot of moments where it might be a character doing something, like for example, if it's Ash Williams and he's getting all his gear on, and you do the quick cuts, like you might show a chainsaw and then him doing the strap on his arm or doing his belt, something like that. And we have that throughout the franchise of where it does quick cuts of something happening. In this, they do that, but it seems to be happening when nothing is really happening or when it's relevant. So it feels like sometimes, once again, like some other things in the movie, it sort of feels like they've put it in there because they want to capture what Evil Dead is or make people go, that's very Evil Dead like. But not when it's like you're making a cup of tea or you're making dinner, which is part of, like, in it. I think there is literally a bit where she's making food or making dinner, or something like that, and they're doing the quick sort of cut from going like shot here, shot here, shot here. It's very Evil Dead like, and it makes you think of Evil Dead when you see it, but not if it like sort of has no purpose to what is really sort of like the is happening, or like once again a hero moment, when somebody's like getting all suited and booted to go to war with these deadites. That's when those moments sort of like, or that sort of like camera work, those camera shots really work. And it feels like we sort of like a lot of those shots didn't need to really be there because they didn't really have any purpose to the movie. So like I said, like there is pros, there is cons to almost each thing. You can talk about the visual style and how great it is, but then also there, for me, there might be the same things about the visual style that don't work. The sound works, but then something here might not work, and then so on. So, the brutality side of it is absolutely brilliant, but then at the same time, was that at the forefront of their mind when they were making the movie, rather than making it, the other bits that fall flat, it doesn't necessarily work as well. So it's interesting because there are a lot of pros and cons to how I feel about this movie. And then the other thing as well is add to the whole, like, is this brutality for brutality's sake and violent for violence sake? We do get a scene, of course, in the credits, which I'll talk about a little bit as well, which sort of to me just felt a little bit thrown in and almost sort of irrelevant. I don't know why we had it, but also there's a couple things when once again, it's about adding things and you don't need to. For example, of course they do a pretty horrible thing to a dog in it, and that's, there are, of course, there are going to be people going, yeah, but they do this in movies all the time and stuff like that. But at the same time, I'm very much the type of person that's like, we don't need to, because to sell something, because quite honestly, if you take the scene out of this movie, or the scenes out where the dog is in this movie, if you take it out, it has no impact essentially really as to what happens in the movie. It's just they do it to sell how evil the Deadites are in this movie and how brutal and violent this movie is. That once again feels like that's at the forefront of some of the other very important things that it doesn't necessarily focus on. So doing that horrible stuff to a dog doesn't need to happen. And then, of course, we do also get a horrible thing that happens to a kid in the end credit scene, which once again feels like you don't need to do that. So once again, as I said, it sort of leans into me thinking about, is the, was everything a concern, or was the biggest concern was delivering, making sure you're delivering great set pieces, which of course it did, but also was it more so about, really showing us the violent nature of what the Deadites are, more so than the other stuff, which for me isn't necessarily a good thing. Um, so, and then, as I said, we do know that so at the end of this movie, before I go into my overall thoughts, we do get a connection with Evil Dead Rise, a few times in this movie. Um, but it's also, but what I don't really sort of get, because is the connection to it, because is this telling us either one? I think it's like either one of two things. Either this is already telling us we're going to get another Evil Dead movie, as well as the one we're already getting, because we already know that we're getting another Evil Dead movie called Evil Dead Wrath, and we already know that it's set in the 70s, which we also already know, if you've seen Evil Dead Rise, that movie is set modern day. It's not a movie setting in the 70s. So where do we go from here? And that's what is sort of interesting, but also a little bit confusing, because is this movie saying that now with the addition in the credits of Mama Deadeye, Alyssa Sutherland, I think it's her name is. I could be wrong, so I apologise if it is. But of course, she was so great in Evil Dead Rise. But we get her in this. What is where are we going with this franchise now? Because of course we know the next one is going to be set in the 70s and so on. And is this now like, are we going to be doing more time travel? Are we going to be doing like more weird things with the franchise? Or is it a case of them saying or is it a case of them just going, we'll shove this in here because we haven't seen her since Evil Dead Rise and we don't see her ever again, which would be weird as fuck and doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. So I feel, for me personally, especially at this time, it feels like it was sort of thrown in there, because we already know we're getting another Evil Dead movie that's set in the 70s. So how does it work with her in it? And for me, it doesn't, unless of course they find out and figure out a way of doing it. I don't know, but then does that mean we're getting another Evil Dead movie after Evil Dead Wrath? I don't know. And then we will continue to do what we've already get worried about, which is run the risk of a bad Evil Dead movie, or a good and not great Evil Dead movie, which of course we don't want. But let's get into that. Let's get into my overall thoughts. So even though I spoke quite a lot about negatives of the movie, for one, I think that sort of goes to show the importance of how much I love this franchise, to have so many sort of like things that I don't necessarily like or think weren't necessarily the right decisions for the movie, in once again in my opinion. But when it works and it works very well. And do I really like this movie? Yes. I think that this is a good Evil Dead movie. I think that this potentially is a very good Evil Dead movie. Not just good, because good means it's good or average. This is above average, for a movie. I really like it. The sad part is, for me, is this a great Evil Dead movie? I don't think it is. And that sort of makes me sad. But also, the other thing that makes me sort of sad is the fact that, of course, this being 2026, and this has already been such a wild year for horror, and we have already had some incredible movies. Whenever I have, there's an Evil Dead movie coming out, my expectation is that Evil Dead movie is going to be my favorite movie of the year. Not just because my expectation is beforehand that I want it to be, because it should be. Um, that's how I feel about it. It should be my favorite movie of the year, and it's not. But also, that does go to show what a world we live in currently when it comes to horror, because of how good horror movies are at the moment. Or not all of them. There's a lot of shit ones, but we currently are in a time when there's a lot of very, very, very good, fantastic horror movies, and movies that I never expected to be so good. It's such a shame for me that the movie that I really want to try and do what I can to expect it to be very good, or hope that it's very good, so to speak, it doesn't necessarily end up being what I was hoping, and that's a little bit sad. But honestly, no matter all about all the negatives that I might say, of course, like I said at the start, when it comes to my pros, it ticks a lot of the boxes that you want ticked for an Evil Dead movie. The Deadites are great. It is gnarly. It is violent. It is visceral. It is brutal, and it is bloody and gory. And it is the most of all of those things that I just mentioned than any other Evil Dead movie, which once again goes to the highlight of this movie, if that's something that you absolutely love, because of how absolutely insane and gnarly every movie has been in this franchise. Well, I mean, you know, apart from obviously Army of Darkness, which is of course a different type of movie, but when you're talking about, you know, the Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2, Evil Dead from 2013, and of course Evil Dead Rise, you know, there's some gnarly things that happen in those movies, and they can be violent and evil. This is the one that tops all of those for now, because of course we don't know where we go in the future. But as I said, for me, it falls flat when it's away from these great, incredible set pieces. It falls a little bit flat because of I don't really necessarily care too much about the journey we're on with these characters, which is a shame because you want that with an Evil Dead movie. But I also think some of that might be down to the fact that not the performances aren't necessarily interesting, or they don't really feel like it's weird because they are good. The performances are good. They're not bad. But it's just suddenly, once again, like a lot of the movie, there's something that just falls a little bit flat about the characters, the performances, and when we're away from the gnarly stuff that happens. And that's where the movie falters and doesn't work so much. And of course, you know, it doesn't help when there's like almost hardly any color to the movie whatsoever, unless there's fire everywhere, which of course looks absolutely great. So overall, it's sad that this isn't a great Evil Dead movie for me personally. There are going to be people out there that have probably said this is their favorite Evil Dead movie. There are people out there that think Evil Dead 2013 or Evil Dead Rise is their favorite of the franchise. And anyone who thinks that is absolutely fine too. The first Evil Dead movie is my favorite Evil Dead movie, but it's not just about the fact that I love the movie. I love the fact that it inspired me to be a filmmaker. It's very important to me, but I love every movie in this franchise unconditionally. For me, every movie in this franchise is a 5-star movie. I guess the question for me is whether this movie is a 5-star movie. And quite honestly, the sad thing is that I don't know right now, and that is something that will take maybe like my next viewing or a couple times. But I do suppose, you know, think that the good thing about this movie is that where Evil Dead, for me, I hold it so highly. It might be something that clouds my judgment a little bit, because the fact is that this movie is still better than a lot of movies that is out there, now and currently, or older movies or whatever. It is still a fantastic movie. So I would absolutely recommend Evil Dead. Burn. You might find that it is your favorite Evil Dead movie, and I'm sure there are people out there that do think that. There are a lot of things that don't work for me about it, but there are a lot of things, like I said, when we come to the tick boxes of everything that is Evil Dead, there are a lot of things that do work about it. So there we go. I mean, honestly, it's good enough for me to look forward to watching it again, which also is more than what a lot of horror movies do now, where I'm like, I either wish I never watched it, or I don't ever need to see it again. And this is a movie that I do already look forward to watching it again. It's a good movie. The sad part, like I've already said, for me is that where it's an Evil Dead movie, it's not a great Evil Dead movie. But good sometimes is good enough, right? Especially in a genre where there's a lot of not so good movies and utter shite. So there we go. That's my review. As I said at the start, they're not quick reviews, but I try and be as constructive, as detailed as I possibly can. If you like this review, Of course, please make sure you subscribe, doing all the stuff that I hate doing, but there is literally a button to say subscribe right next to where you're watching this video. Please do. It costs you nothing. It's absolutely free, but it helps me in a massive way, more than you will ever know. The way that, you are always going to be the biggest part in any success Let's Talk Horror has. And I want to keep doing this. I want to keep evolving. I want to keep reaching new audiences, and that's all down to you. So click subscribe. Follow us on all the socials. Of course, go and check out the podcast, where if you like this detailed conversation about Evil Dead Burn, then go and check out some movies that you absolutely love and the conversations that I have about them as well. Of course, it's on this YouTube channel and it's on any podcast platform. But that's the review. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you didn't, oh well, that's it. But until next time, stay creepy, fuckers.